And what's up? Welcome in GC Live Wednesday episode of the show. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark. Lots to get to. I don't even know what to title the show, to be honest. There's nothing like breaking going on, but there's just a lot of little stuff going on, a lot of noteworthy things going on, Chris. And I want to try to hit as much of it as we can today. I'm sure we're going to miss some things. Of course, I know Mike was on last night taking a bunch of y'all's questions, and then Colin had a bunch of baseball stuff on Monday. But maybe even we'll hit on that as LSU comes to town. Massive series for South Carolina baseball. As always, though, primarily we're going to talk a little bit of Gamecock football and football recruiting. It's been interesting, Chris. You know, I don't like when people go like revisionist history, and it's kind of like when there's a new coaching staff, we only sometimes look at all the good the new one's doing, but we forget the previous one did some good as well. And point being, I was thinking today about the number of high level recruiting prospects that South Carolina has had rolling through the doors in the last, like, let's say 3 months, as we start April here. And there were definitely, like, I'm not going to revisionist history it. There were definitely lots of good players that came on campus when Will Muschamp was here. And there was lots of good players, the final Spurrier years when the thing sort of blew up, there were a lot of good players. They just had the issue where half their class decommitted. However, Chris, I don't know if they've had this many high-level players to go ahead and commit early while also having more prospects rolling in. And then you have 2025s, David Sanders Jr., who we actually had written for our subscribers on Saturday, was aiming to be back on campus on Thursday. Sanders confirmed that to the public earlier today. He's going to be at practice tomorrow. So you've had what some people would say are the top two prospects in the class of 2025 have been on your campus at some point in the last few months. So I don't know, man. It's just very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack because you gave a bunch of different points there, and they're all correct.
Bouncing around as usual.
No, I mean, they're all correct. We could do a whole show on this. Is the great thing. I mean, to start off, like let's start with this point. 2024 class, you mentioned they're off to a hot start, and they are. And that's when you look at both quality and quantity. So quality of the class, at one time they're number 7. I think they're number 9 now in the On3 industry team rankings. So averaging all 4 major recruiting services into the player rankings and then kind of formalizing that and spitting out a ranking of where each class is. This is a group that has a lot of quality. You know, you look at the number of 4 stars. Every prospect in the class is a 4-star with the exception of Blake Franks, who, by the way, is not a throwaway. He's a guy that Clemson wanted. He's a guy that had, Southeast offers, national offer list. So this was also a coveted guy on the recruiting trail. So every single prospect that you have in the class is a quality guy. So you have quality. You also have quantity. I didn't even realize this, Wes. I went back and looked. I don't remember how far back, to be honest with you, I looked, but this is one of the faster starts that South Carolina's had. Not just under Shane Beamer, but in the last several years when I went back and looked. Now, there are a lot of different reasons for that. Number one, if we compared the 2024 cycle to, say, 2014, guys commit earlier now. Just as a general rule, you start getting commitments earlier and earlier. You have the early signing period. You didn't have that in 2014. Everything has accelerated this clock. But that said, this has still been a historically fast start. And when you pair that with the quality, you're certainly spitting out a good product right now for South Carolina. The exciting thing is, maybe the actual verbal commitment train has slowed down just a little bit, even though you just got Franks recently. You have a chance to get Josiah Thompson in 9 days, who would be another 4, actually possibly 5-star when you average them all together, Wes. 5-star type player in Josiah Thompson. And that's before you even get into the summer. We've seen over the last few years a lot of recruiting activity in the summer. Why is that? Well, you get camps where you get new offers being dispensed, another opportunity for guys to come on campus. You get official visit season in June. Prospects really before June even, but you see in June a lot of times South Carolina is going to be hosting some of its priority 2024 targets on campus for visits. It's very typical and has been typical in Columbia that you get several summer commitments too. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that South Carolina could, we don't know this, it's just a possibility, could go into the season with a decent amount of hay in the barn, for this 2024 class. And so that should be exciting. Wes, you mentioned how many of the top guys they have had on campus. Y'all forgive me as I look at a second screen here. I'm looking back even, man, at 2024. They're not going to get all these guys. But you look at just the top 10 in the On3 industry ranking, and South Carolina's had several of these guys on campus. When you go to the On3 individual ranking, it's even more. They've had a lot of quality on campus, and that's the first step, right? But the second step is trying to sign some of those guys. You do get the sense, and I'm totally with you, not revisionist history. Sometimes you'll see these ridiculous statements. South Carolina never had 5 stars on campus under Spurrier or Muschamp. Not true. Not true, because both those coaches also signed some 5-star players. But there is a little bit of a different feel. Is that fair? There's a little bit of a different vibe about the recruiting trajectory right now in terms of the number of high-level guys that they're actually in the game with a legitimate shot to possibly close on in 2024.
Well, I think, Chris, you've seen it kind of pick up, to be completely fair. Like, I think we've seen it go to another level in the last, really, frankly, I think you look at the combination of beating Tennessee, beating Clemson, finishing the class on a positive note, and just all the buzz that has created. I think that's fed into kind of like what Dow Loggins was talking about. If you land a 5-star, other 5-stars get interested. And I think that's a little bit, Chris, just following it for a long time, that's a little bit of an oversimplification of it. But at the same time, I think the greater point of that comment is that really good players want to play with other really good players. And these guys are more connected than they've ever been as far as following what each other are doing. So I think when you have this combination of a staff that is down to earth, connects well with players and their parents, and then you're having success on the field and on the recruiting trail, people are going to take notice. And then just guys recruiting the class for you. You look at, we've talked about Dante Reno, Mazio Pennant. Chris, it was pointed out to us recently. I mean, Cam Pringle deserves some love as well. Maybe one of the best recruiters on the staff as far as getting out, using the energy and time to get other guys to join him. It'll be very interesting to see what this class ends up doing when maybe there's some guys out there who we just aren't even paying that much attention to. But if they keep having success, you always have the potential for a late guy to just pop in, or a guy pops up on the radar in the summer, has a great camp. We haven't even reached the late bloomer portion. There may be a 4-star, who's going to be the Nick Eamon, who's going to be the Vakari Swain, the Lenoris Sellers, who's going to be that guy for this class. We're just talking about that initial push of players. Always intriguing to see which of the unknown guys, or which of the kind of just mid-3 regular type prospects, the somewhat negative connotation of is like a just a guy type prospect. Like, yeah, he's a good player, but you're not going wild over getting him. But then maybe it's a misevaluation early. Maybe not enough eyes are on the guy early, and they just blow up. Or they blow up just in your own circle, like Eamon, where you're kind of like, why is nobody else going after this guy? But we don't know who those guys are going to be yet for this class is my point.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there's a long list of guys that we could reel off that we have seen in camp maybe for the first time, and we're kind of tracking during camp day. Okay, this guy, it appears he may be a guy that gets an offer. That guy ends up being a Gamecock, and it's gone in several different directions, right? You have guys that maybe haven't worked out or have become injured, or you have on the other end of the spectrum, Eamon Warrior. You have Darius Rush, who we watched in camp, who was a guy that, we were tracking. There might be somebody out there that we're not tracking at all, who ends up being a big time camp guy. So it's a great point. I mean, we know a lot of the candidates in this class in terms of top priorities that could always, even in this new era where it's harder to be undiscovered, so to speak. I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but guys are more well known, right? There's so much film out there. There's several recruiting services. There's all sorts of scouting services. It's harder to be undiscovered, but sometimes it's really more nowadays, Wes, about a guy that you already know about, but you need more data on. And so camp represents a great time to do that. Hey, I like this. I'm about to put this up on the screen from SC Scout Guy. This is a great point. Beamer's shooting for the moon as far as going after the best players and making them tell you no instead of we don't have a shot and not hosting them. So it's a good point. And I think, Wes, when you, as a program, when you're kind of on the come up, as so to speak, and you start landing some guys where regionally and nationally the narrative starts being, or the question starts being asked rather, how is that school landing those types of players, right? And I'm going to give a painful example, okay, for South Carolina fans. It's not as painful now because of what happened last year on the field. Remember Clemson under Dabo Swinney, right? Some of those early recruiting classes that he put together, even under Tommy Bowden, like you think about C.J. Spiller, who Dabo recruited. You think about some of the classes that they started to put together, some of the guys that they started getting to say yes. And you remember, everybody remembers this who's a Gamecock, sitting around going, why are those people picking Clemson? There is some of that going on right now with South Carolina, which should make you very, very happy, in my opinion, if you're a Gamecock fan. Nicholas Harbor, right? He could have gone about anywhere in the country. Could have gone to Michigan. He could have gone to, obviously, Oregon. Any number of places, chose South Carolina. You look in the 2024 class, and there's kind of a mix, right? There's some guys who were in your state that were national names that you were able to keep in state, which has not always happened here at South Carolina or even at Clemson. But you've also got some other more national level recruits that you've already gotten to say yes, or that you have kind of on the hook. And so I think when you find that mix, Wes, between keeping guys in state, being resourceful with what you find out of the state or in the transfer portal, and then going and hitting on some of the big time players, some of these 5-star types like a Harbor, that's when you can really, really get it cooking. I mentioned too, the number of top 10 guys that they've had in the 2024 class. It's even more so in 25. You alluded to this earlier, Wes. On 3 industry ranking, again, the average of all 4 major services, weighted average. David Sanders, number 1. He's been on campus more than once, being on campus tomorrow. Elijah Griffin, same thing, number 2 out of Savannah. Then you go down to, I don't know if he's been on campus. Naeem Offord is number 6, the corner from Alabama. DJ Pickett, who visited this spring, number 8. Zayden
Florida
Walker.
kid, right?
Yep, from Florida. Zayden Walker, the edge from Georgia, has been on campus, I believe. And Jonte Gilbert out of Atlanta, the Ohio State commits, number 10. And South Carolina has a really good shot to eventually flip him. So, named about 5 or 6 guys who've been on campus. And then out of those 5 or 6 guys, you have a realistic shot with 4 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them. If you can land 3 of the top 10 players, that's, even if they fall, so to speak, and they're 25, 50, you're getting into that blue chip territory you want to be in.
Well, I think with Elijah Griffin, South Carolina probably top 2 with South Carolina and Georgia. I think he even publicly has said that. Then you look at David Sanders. I think it's a wider net right now as far as the schools he is considering. Maybe there's 5, 6 schools or so, but South Carolina is in that mix as well. So, I mean, big time players, and we'll certainly see how that plays out. We've talked to a bunch of them already. We're still trying to get reactions for some others. They've really gotten a great head start at some positions on 25th or 2025, partially because they feel so good, I think, about their 2024 class. It's allowed them to go ahead and push forward a little bit. Let's talk a little transfer portal action, Chris, and then I want to talk actual spring practice. Beamer, of course, spoke yesterday. Some assistants will talk tomorrow. Spring practice is, I mean, guys, it's getting closer. Like, this thing has flown by. It's going to be over soon. So we're starting to kind of get towards the final push for spring practice. So I want to get into that stuff and storylines from that a little bit. But first, we didn't tell you about our buddy Clint Hammond off the top. So ClintHammond.com, 803-771-6933. That's how you can get in touch with Clint. He is a mortgage broker here for Movement Mortgage in Columbia, South Carolina. And I have, me and my wife bought our house with Clint. The house I bought before we were together, I did it with Clint. I've got several friends who have bought using Clint. Been a perfect, just streamlined process every single time. So do what I did. Give Clint a call if you're in the market for a new home, or if you're just kind of curious how the process works and want to see if you're ready for that. Clint can walk you through that too. 803-771-6933. Chris, the portal we thought would be a post-spring thing. However, with this fact that you can enter the portal kind of whenever you want, it appears, if you are a graduate, it has left your opportunities open for both player and for school in this case. Carolina, with several guys in here recently over the weekend and going into this week. Let's start, I guess, with Tank Booker, defensive tackle from Maryland. It's reading reports elsewhere, Chris. He's kind of been on multiple visits to other SEC schools. I think Arkansas has been involved. Texas A&M has been involved. But I don't have feedback really of any kind yet on how this visit went over the weekend. However, the visit did take place, so getting him on campus, a first step. And I think a lot of fans, maybe at first glimpse, say, why do we need a defensive tackle? But I think when you dive a little bit deeper, it actually makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Nate Adkins situation last year a little bit. Remember, Nate Adkins, okay, I get it. Looks like could be a good player. I'll trust the coaches on it type of thing. But, hey, look at the tight end room, and why not a DB or why not something else? Well, a little bit different this year because South Carolina isn't, for instance, down to their last spot. There are presumably some not even presumably, there are some greater needs, right? But even then, some fans may be saying, well, why take, like you said, Wes, defensive tackle? I think several things. Number one, little bit of a different body type / skill set than what you have, probably. But also look at some of the different formations that we know South Carolina is at least looking to employ this year, in addition to their typical four-man front. We know that they may want to play some 5. They may want to play some 3. You also, because of your lack of edge depth, you may see Tonka Hemingway playing outside some. Wes, I know at practice the other day you observed TJ Sanders playing end in a 3-man front. Both Tonka and TJ for South Carolina are more of your prototypical, they've been defensive tackles. So you actually need, I think, some more bodies up front, even at a position at defensive tackle where you have, a good bit more depth and edge. I still think that this move, to look at bringing him in, don't want to say bringing in, but to look at bringing in somebody like Tank Booker, I actually think it makes a good bit of sense. And you can never be too deep on the defensive line. If you can add a good player who can give you something there, I think it's something you take a look at all day.
Well, and Chris, on top of all that, they've struggled to stop the run, man. Like that's the reality of it. If you can get a run stopping type defensive tackle, it really just gives you a little bit more flexibility to how you want to kind of like employ all your guys, like how you want to use them as far as down distance, like you talked about 3-man versus 4-man front. It gives you the ability, hey, against a run team, a run first team, do you want to go super heavy up front? Play Tonka on the edge with a guy like Tank Booker inside teamed up with someone else. I mean, I think it would give you quite a bit of flexibility. And then, I'm guessing that South Carolina's DPP, Director of Player Personnel, Taylor Edwards, is familiar with Tank Booker, considering that he was in the same role at Maryland before he got to South Carolina. So you probably have a pretty good understanding of his skill set, his ability. Not a guy who you're just going to look at the bio and the numbers. The kid we're going to talk about here in a second, the numbers are going to kind of just jump off the page. But with Booker, he's not a stat stuffer. And a lot of times he was a reserve guy. He was second teamer. But, love or hate PFF, he actually has graded out very well the last couple of years on PFF and is one of those guys who I could see. Again, I don't know if Carolina's getting this kid or not. I don't want to sort of pretend or say that they are. I could see him, Chris, being one of those guys, though, that once again doesn't have a massive year wherever he ends up, but the coaches are just like, oh, yeah, that guy does his job every time. A guy like that can make you a lot better defensively against the run without it being flashy by holding up that offensive line and allowing your linebackers to actually go make plays.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. And even if he, in this hypothetical world, if he were to end up at South Carolina, there's some, if you land a guy who's a backup tackle, that's extremely valuable. Backups are extremely valuable with the competition level that South Carolina faces. I think we all saw last season, Wes, there were certain guys on this roster that had to play too many snaps. That wasn't necessarily at tackle. That was really, I'm thinking more of the edge position, right? Which is a different conversation, different position. But to have guys that you can trust to roll in there that have a specific skill set, extremely valuable to find a guy that has experience and some talent and past production, quality play from the portal to slide in there. So, yeah, makes a lot of sense to take a look at that.
So, as I talked about a second ago, Chris, they do have someone who actually is probably still on campus right now, or at least was on campus, that the numbers do just sort of jump off the page at you. And that would be Utah State transfer portal linebacker AJ Von. Golly, Chris, I was going to practice this in the mirror because I was going to impress everyone that I actually knew how to pronounce his name.
I was waiting on it.
I know you were. I could sense you waiting on it, and that's why I struggled.
I'm sorry.
But, okay, so it is Vong Pachon. Vong Pachon.
Vong Pachon, okay.
Yeah, Vong Pachon. AJ Vong Pachon. That actually sounds pretty smooth right there. AJ Vong Pachon. So he was on campus, we know, yesterday. That means he's probably finishing up today or early tomorrow. Official visit. A guy who he is a stat stuffer at Utah State. Entered the portal, grad transfer, so 1 year left. Honorable mention, All Mountain West in 2020. Started all 13 games last year at Utah State. Led the team in tackles with 101. Couple of sacks, 10.5 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups, 3 quarterback hurries, 2 forced fumbles, which led the team in that category as well. This match, Chris, we had heard some rumblings. This matches something we've hinted at and then talked about off air too. Don't be surprised when they hit up some positions that maybe you didn't circle in the offseason. But I certainly think linebacker is one of those spots quietly. If you could find a guy that truly upgrades that spot, I think you go do it. Because one, there's still some unknowns there. And 2, it allows there to be a little less pressure on Mo Kaba in terms of him just coming back along at his own pace.
Yeah, and you do have some questions there, right? I mean, athletically, the linebacker position on paper looks a little bit better than last season, but the experience does not. When you count the fact that Kaba, who still is not an extremely experienced player, Wes, right? He was going into his first year as a full-time starter last year before he got hurt in the second game against Arkansas. You got him coming off of a second knee injury, but you also have a lot of players who to date are either still young or inexperienced overall. They've been more reserves in their roles. So, right, we've talked about this a lot, that South Carolina as a program is not in position to turn down a great player at almost any spot. And really nobody is. I mean, we've seen Alabama, Georgia take great players as transfers in the past or to fill a hole. At a lot of spots for South Carolina, there are a couple where you need some depth. So not to put it like this, not that you need anybody, but you need some depth at the very minimum, a starter at the maximum, like edge and running back. There are some spots where you feel okay, where you would still take a great player because you don't want to turn it down. Maybe offensive line, for example, wide receiver. But there are other spots where you're kind of in between there where you go, okay, can we upgrade this? And that's probably what, linebacker, defensive back, defensive tackle, right? There's a few of those that fall into that category. So, and Vong Pashan, that was my first effort at that. Not bad. This is a guy that's been obviously super productive during his career. He's got impressive size. He has a lot of experience. And that's something that when you're looking at bridging the gap, Wes, like you said, again, another move that would make a lot of sense. Another move that I think would be pretty resourceful if it ends up happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have a feel. A lot of these transfer guys, Chris, don't really talk a ton doing interviews. Sometimes it seems like I don't know who else is involved is kind of always the question. But you would think with him he very recently hit the portal. For Carolina to get him in so quickly, and for him to have an SEC opportunity, generally, that more times than not, that works out. When you get a guy in quick, that seems to be a key because these guys come in and they say, okay, this has what I'm looking for. I can play here. It kind of works out. So we'll see if that's the case here. The other guy we've been tracking, these are the three we've confirmed. I don't know. I guess there's always a chance there could be more. We've confirmed Derek McClendon, a guy I was somewhat familiar. It's kind of one of those names, Chris, where I was like, I do remember that guy. Not that Carolina was hot and heavy with him, not that it was like a big thing we followed, but I remembered that name out of high school. 4-star guy, I think. I know he's from Georgia. Has put together a really solid career at FSU. Another graduate player who was able to enter the portal without it being in a portal window. And man, the awesome irony it would be if Carolina essentially trades him for Gilbert Edmond.
Yeah.
As defensive end / edge guys. I don't know, man. What do you think of him as a prospect? Like, I was looking at his career. Would be a pretty solid addition, I think, for Carolina.
Yeah, I think he would. He's put together some pretty good numbers, production, and a guy that has played at the Power 5 level, right? So, I'll leave it to Gamecock fans in the chat to make ACC jokes or whatever. But, this is a little bit different than saying, okay, can this guy athletically make the leap from even Group of 5, or can this guy make the leap from Division II or FCS? It's not as much of a question with him. This is a guy who was a pretty highly rated prospect from what I recall out of Tucker, which has produced Josh Vann, Dylan Wanham, a whole host of college football talent. And he was kind of in that same era as them. And he's put together some pretty good numbers, and he's got good measurables and physical tools. So look, again, at edge, you're in a position where you don't need just one guy, Wes, out of the portal. I don't think. I think you need two. I mean, realistically, if you're going to feel better about that spot, and then you need to bring some guys that are currently on the roster along. So I don't know, depending on how it shakes out, if McClendon would end up being more of a depth add or if he maybe end up being a starter for you. But I do know if you can get him, and everything checks out, is a move you need to make, I think. So I think it would be a quality pickup.
Yeah, I look at the portal additions. Does he make me a better team or not? And with him, I think that's a fairly easy yes. And then to your point, you just sort it out and kind of see how it plays out from there. So again, those are the three guys we're going to work on. We should maybe hopefully start to be able to get a little bit of feedback on how things went. Where does Carolina stand? What does the future look like for these guys in terms of their decisions, how quickly they want to make them, and stuff like that? That's certainly something we'll be tracking. And everything I hear, Chris, they'll continue to be very aggressive when this portal window opens post spring. Now, dude, if you could add three guys, if you had three guys before then, you've really helped yourself, I feel like, and you don't feel quite as pressed going into that post-spring window. Especially, again, we've talked about ad nauseum. We've talked about edge and running back all offseason, I think. So McClendon would certainly be a guy who fits that true edge / defensive end role that they're looking to fill, and would be a good one for Carolina in that regard. Anything else on recruiting, Chris, that you want to hit on before we talk a little football? I mean, I feel like I've almost lost track. There's been so many guys come through.
Oh, yeah.
That it's kind of like we're obviously we're talking about like 1/20th of the guys we could be talking about right now.
Yeah, we're talking about the bigger picture items. I mean, a lot of visitors, if you continue to roll through, new offers going out for 2025 and beyond. Best I can recommend, Wes. Yeah, let's move on to some football and point people towards Gamecock Central, the football recruiting page. Boom. You can go check out some of the most recent stories. Let's do hit on this. I lied. Dylan Stewart has set an official visit to South Carolina. He's, I think, 7th nationally and a 5-star in the On3 industry ranking. He's actually On3, their individual rankings, the number one prospect in the country for the 2024 class. He's been to South Carolina, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 times. Supposed to be back for the spring game, last I heard. We'll have to double check that closer to time. But he'll be officially visiting South Carolina this summer in June. And the competition, as expected, Wes, continues to ratchet up. Georgia, Ohio State, they'll get officials this summer too. There might be others. He's been visiting a lot of programs this spring, but that's definitely a note worth mentioning. Dylan Stewart visiting officially South Carolina again this summer.
Well, and Chris, his recruitment is starting to take shape, I feel like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Chad Simmons, I missed this when he put it in there, but Chad Simmons, I believe, has an Ohio State prediction in.
He does.
So you've got an Ohio State prediction. You've got an Alabama prediction. Part of me, Chris, wants to put in a South Carolina prediction just to even this thing out.
Yeah.
And see what it does to the RPM. Because I don't know, man. So he's fresh off of a Georgia visit. That apparently went pretty well. And I think fresh off an Ohio State visit at some point too. Fairly recently. Is that right?
Yep.
So I forget the dates. It all runs together. But point being, they've got kind of the recency push, basically.
Yep.
I think the Gamecocks feel pretty good about where they're at, though. Like, we know this is a marathon. And I think, look at the official visits. And so Georgia, South Carolina, Ohio State are going to definitely get officials. I would think Alabama, if they continue to push for him, would get one as well. But Carolina's in this thing, man. So we'll. I feel like they're playing the long game right now. Like, there's some buzz. This is kind of the, take a visit, have a great time. Everybody knows that. Carolina's playing the stronger, longer game right now. And the interesting thing for him will just be, what is the timeline? I think people get caught up. Like, for example, when I posted about David Sanders, our buddy Warlick, who is a recruitment, big Gamecock Twitter guy, Gamecock recruiting guy forever, he asked me, like, where does it stand? Well, I feel like one of the most underrated aspects of trying to follow recruiting is how far along is the guy?
Yeah.
Like David Sanders, I think there's legitimately 5, 6. Like, he's just going through the process right now.
Yeah.
I think with Dylan Stewart, we're starting to see him lock in on the true contenders. Now the question, if you're Carolina, really for any school involved, is this going to be one of those July decisions? Is this going to be a December decision? Because you got to know where the finish line is to know whether you're sprinting or pacing yourself, I think.
Yeah, and there's so much to know. I mean, what type of kid is he? It's easy to just read, okay, well, this, and on 3 RPM or a crystal ball. And like those things can be important in certain situations. I mean, we put in RPM picks sometimes, Wes, and sometimes we know something's happening. Sometimes you feel like something's probably happening. Sometimes we change them, based on new information. With Dylan Stewart, like, we knew this point would come. You do not land, if you're South Carolina, a 5-star, like, uncontested. If you're Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, you do not land a 5-star uncontested. They get a lot of those guys. They also lose a lot, but they battle for every single one of them. You do not just get a national level guy to commit and then keep him committed, and there's no issues ever. That simply doesn't happen. You have to battle on every single one of those guys. Sometimes once you get them committed, depending on the kid, you don't have to worry as much, right? That's what you hope. But you have to get there. And so South Carolina, I think Sterling Lucas, Shane Beamer, they've done a really good job with this one. And we have heard, Wes, many times to anticipate this. Like, Dylan Stewart is a very prolific visitor. He's visited a lot of schools. He's probably, I think it's safe to say, he's visited South Carolina more than any other school. But this is a kid that's been out to the West Coast. He's been up and down the East Coast. He's been everywhere in between. And so he's going to take his time with it and go see things. But, when there was more South Carolina buzz, it was kind of, hey, there's a lot of buzz. They lead. He's publicly stated they're the leader. That doesn't mean it's done. You're going to have to weather this storm because the competition is going to increase. Same thing now with Georgia and Bama and Ohio State. Yeah, one of those may have temporarily, maybe, overtaken the lead, or maybe he's thinking about one of those the most right now. But there's still a ways to go on this, and I think the official visits are going to be very important. And I think here's the strongest I'll go. Anybody that writes off South Carolina's chances with them right now, not smart, not wise to do that, because they've laid a really solid groundwork with him here.
Is he going to be, for Gamecock fans for this class, the Nick Harbor, Jordan Birch, Ryan Alinsky? Is he going to be the guy that we have to talk about?
I think so.
Or that we should talk about every single day because people just want to.
He should be.
Hear about him?
I've almost, like, he's gotten a good bit of chatter and conversation. I feel like not as much for some reason, maybe as it approaches and becomes more real, that will increase, right?
Yeah.
But he's certainly deserving of that distinction, that amount of talk.
No doubt, man. All right, so we're going to talk a little football first. Going to tell you about our friends at Liberty Tax. It is tax time, like, for real. Like, do your taxes. Today is the 5th. You have less than 2 weeks. So if you have not called Liberty Tax yet, you better get on that. But you do still have time. So they are open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays right now. You can start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. You can make an appointment. You can walk in. You can upload your tax documents ahead of time. You have all these different options on how you can handle doing this that will make it easy for you. So, again, give our friends a call. Overcome your tax anxiety. We tell you about them all the time. Columbia, Irmo, and Lexington locations, 803-462-5576. Again, 803-462-5576. Appreciate Liberty Tax and our friends over there for supporting this show for over a year now. And I understand Mike Yuva's going to be telling you about his tax experience with them here soon as well. Chris, so Shane Beamer spoke. He's spoken like every week this spring. This is his first time to speak after a scrimmage. Gamecocks again, you'll hear from them on Thursday as well. Did you have any big takeaways from the Beamer press conference on Tuesday? And then I'm going to try to give the folks a takeaway or two from practice from the open portion on Tuesday.
Yeah, I've one smaller one and one bigger picture one. The smaller one, I'll start there. Beamer did mention that he kind of, I don't know if admitted is the right word. It's not like he's being pinned down on something, but he did say that he and the staff feel better about running back than they did coming into the spring. And that's not atypical. I don't know if he at this point with 10 practices down would say, no, we don't feel any better, or now things are going poorly on that. But I think he kind of brought it up somewhat unprompted. He was talking about, I think, answering a question about the running back group, but he didn't have to say it. And so, look, again, broken record alert, doesn't change the fact this staff will be hitting the portal on May 1st to look for another back. But one of the kind of goals that we knew they needed to accomplish this spring was to walk away feeling better about, the room with Juju McDowell, Mario Anderson, DeCarrion Joyner. There's some questions to answer there. They do seem to feel better, which is a positive. My other one, Wes, was that Shane Beamer, who's a meticulous note taker, looked back and compared this week last year and kind of how things went. And he was unhappy with how things went last year. And that was, maybe the way they practiced, but even academically, they had some issues this same week last year. They didn't clean the locker room well enough. And you can tell he's trying to use some of these small things with his team as motivation to get better. He's spoken even this offseason when we had our sit down with him, Wes, earlier this year. He talked about challenging everybody in the building to find ways to get better at whatever their role is. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Had a little story on that earlier today on Gamecock Central, just looking back and showing his team, hey, we're getting close to the end of spring, but let's not get complacent. Here's what we did last year. It wasn't good enough. Let's make it better. Let's finish strong this year.
And I do think, Chris, he's done a really good job of just internally kind of noting, hey, don't forget this next year. Like, note to self, this is something maybe I liked. This is something I didn't like. This is something I liked, but I want to tweak. Maybe this is something we're just going to throw out. Like, I think continuing to grow and, just tweak things within your program is a big part of being a coach, whether you are in year 3 as a head coach or, year 30. So I think kudos to him, as far as that is concerned. I think we've seen a lot of just him settling into this job, if that makes sense. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think anybody that you hear from who's a first-time head coach, will always say, hey, here's some things that were different, or here's what I didn't anticipate. Beamer had a lot of experience with really good head coaches in a lot of different roles, but it's always different once you get in that big chair and everything's falling on you. He also took over Wes at just, quite frankly, just a crazy time, like an unprecedented time. Couldn't go on the road to recruit, couldn't bring guys on your campus to recruit, putting together a staff. There's COVID. I mean, it was a completely insane time, quite frankly. And so I do think that there is a growing process for anybody. That's not just Shane Beamer. That's any head coach. And the really good ones that you look at, if you can go and look back at their career trajectories, they always almost have some type of, not even failures, but just some tweaks along the way, some growth, some evolutions. And I think you've seen that. I mean, Shane Beamer, Wes, back to the note-taking thing. I mean, he mentioned that in our one-on-one with him, that he has just folders and notebooks just full of, whether it's just ideas of something, like you said, to bring up to the team, or even stuff from dating way back to like his Mississippi State days and just sitting in a staff meeting, just something that he learned to pick up on. And I think if you're constantly doing that assessing of what you're doing and trying to bring in some stuff that worked in the past and throw out what doesn't work, that's what being a head coach is all about.
I wonder what his best note from Spurrier, like I wonder what his biggest takeaway from Spurrier of what he did that Beamer wants to copy, and his biggest takeaway of never do that.
That is a good. There's your first question for next year. Sit down.
Yeah, I don't. That's kind of one of those things you'd have to be a little careful with, I think.
Probably so, but I can almost guarantee there's examples of both. We'll have to see if he says them, but
yeah, let's see if we can get them out of him. So yeah, open practice Tuesday. I believe another open practice tomorrow, so we'll have a little bit more from that. I'll tie this in a little bit to what Beamer was talking about. They're a little banged up right now in the secondary. Chris, that's kind of it doesn't seem like there's always like just one position that gets hit a little bit harder than the others. Maybe I shouldn't even bring this up. Like Gamecock fans are going to be knocking on wood if they can, but I feel like for the most part, the guys that have been expected to be on the field, like your main rotational, your ones and your twos, your guys who are in these position battles, kind of jockeying for, am I a one or am I a two? We've had guys where we've heard like, oh, they're banged up, but they're still practicing. Some guys, maybe they've been easy on, like a Trey Knox was banged up, but still practicing at one point. For the most part, they've stayed pretty healthy this spring, I feel like, and it's allowed their guys to kind of go play. In some ways, maybe you want a somewhat quiet spring. And like I look at the storylines, like I try to think of the storylines we had coming in. I don't know if there's like a lot of just weird, unexpected movement. Like I feel like as boring as this is, it's kind of like when you look at the first team that was out there on Tuesday, it's Rattler at QB. It's pretty much the same 5 or 6 guys on the O-line. Ja'Kai Moore was out because of a family matter. And so you had Nick Gargiulo at left guard, but for the most part, that's kind of been what it's looked like anyway. You've had Jalen Nichols at left tackle. You've had Wanamaker at right tackle. Vershawn Lee at center. Trey Jones at right guard. You've had Trey Knox or Josh Simon as first team tight end every time I've been out there. I mean, for the most part, it kind of has been a little bit of a status quo type spring. Now, I do think you look at that running back spot. Beamer said, oh, they're 1A, 1B, 1C, I think was his quote. But not that this is even new to people listening because we talked about it all last week. It does feel like Dakereon Joyner is that guy that has kind of been just continuing to steady push his way into potentially more playing time.
Yeah, it does. Wes, are you going to go? You thought that he might be the day one starter. Are you still there on Dakereon?
Oh yeah, I'm sticking with that at this point. Like,
I mean, I like
all in on it.
The one thing is that a lot of times when they've done the non-depth chart drill, they have had Juju first guy out there, right? We have seen that a lot. We've still seen Ja'Kai being out, Gargiulo at left guard. We've still seen Vershawn Lee at center, and there's a thought that Gargiulo may win a job, and it could even be at center. It's like there's been a couple small things in there, but it could be just more about things just continuing to progress. You're right. I haven't seen – there's not some big surprise this spring so far, but that may not be a bad thing. I mean, for things to continue tracking the way that you anticipated, I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing.
Yeah, I agree. I wish there was more to give the people, as far as newsy type stuff in practice.
We like news.
I did like, I wrote about this. I don't think we've talked about this. We probably have on 107.5, but I liked how, we'll get out of here in a second. I liked how Beamer, at the end of the 11 on 11 that we got to watch, said 1-on-1 inside the 10. I was far away. I don't know exactly where they marked it, but there's a goal line scenario. Gets on the mic, 1-on-1. He says, I want Xavier Legette and a Donald Fortune down here right now, 1-on-1 in front of the whole team. And you got the pressure of the entire offense on one side and the pressure of the entire defense on the other, with everybody watching. So if you're OD, you're playing for the defense. If you're XL, you're playing for the offense. And I like how they sort of add competition or pressure type competition to everything. And in this case, all three guys involved, the third being Spencer Rattler, all three had a great rep. Like OD was there. Legette got the better of him, but I mean, he had to go up and make a beautiful catch. And the throw on a fade ball from Rattler was just, I mean, you couldn't have dropped it in there any better. So I thought it was cool how they're introducing that into the mix. Not that it's something revolutionary, but just kind of tells you how they operate. And it was cool to actually be there for that part. And to see Legette, I mean, dude, he's held off pushes from other guys. We sort of wondered, hey, Eddie Lewis comes in. Does Eddie Lewis get there at that outside spot and just push Legette back into a reserve role? So far, at least the parts we've been at, the depth chart drill, we call it, Legette has been out there with the ones. So we've talked about him many times. Can he sort of have that big final year? Maybe it is tracking in that direction.
It just seems like it has to, right? And there's clearly belief in Xavier Legette from this South Carolina staff. I mean, we heard I remember last spring hearing a lot of good things about him, Wes, and we've only gotten spots and samples of what Xavier Legette can do, right? Always going back to the bowl game catch and the Texas A&M kickoff return, but he has that type of ability. And if he can put that together, stay healthy, be more consistent, there's so much physical ability for him. So appears he's had another good spring. Competition, from what I've heard, Wes, to kind of stay along those lines, competition's been really good. From what we've heard, offense and defense have both had some good moments, whether it's in the scrimmage situations, whether it's in the just practice situations. And Shane Beamer does a really good job of creating those competitive type scenarios in practice. So you're right. Not a lot of big, news items, but it's still been an interesting spring from the parts we've seen, the parts we've heard, and still a good bit to sort out as we head into the summer and kind of finish off the spring here.
Yeah, certainly, man. So we are about out of time, but I did at least give folks real quick a couple of little baseball updates. With some good news, Carson Horning for Gamecock Baseball, according to Mark Kingston, Chris, will, quote, probably be available this weekend. And, they've fared just fine without him. But he was a starter for a reason. A guy who I think is more of a DH, but this team obviously goes into a massive weekend with LSU, number one, coming to town. Thursday, Friday, Saturday series. You want all hands on deck for this thing. And right now, really what you need is for Mother Nature to cooperate with you. Lots of concern on the weather, but I'm excited, man. This feels like old school Gamecock baseball with number one coming to town. I hope they're able to play it out the way baseball is supposed to be played and not with, moving games around, double headers, 3-hour delays. Hopefully, although it does not look great right now, hopefully they can get these 3 games in.
Yeah, man, this is such a highly anticipated series. The weather's putting a damper on it for sure, but this is two really good teams, obviously. And let me say this because I want to talk about LSU's pitcher for a minute. South Carolina has had an amazing season. I mean, you look at what they did against North Carolina last night, 5-0, just a tidy, clean game. South Carolina pitching, heard this on the broadcast. Tommy and remind me, Wes, God, the guy's name.
I believe that's young Brett Williams.
Brett Williams did a really good job. He mentioned this, I believe, that Gamecock pitching got the first two batters out every single time through, 1-9. And, there was some 2-out hitting by North Carolina. South Carolina was able to keep them off the board. Just 2-out hitting by South Carolina. And they just got the better of them. It was a great pitching performance, clutch hitting performance. And this team is really, really good. Now, LSU is really, really good too. Wes, have you seen or heard about their pitcher, Paul Skeens? I guess that's how you pronounce it. This dude is an absolute monster. Mark Kingston said today that if you drew up a picture in a lab, if you just like kind of your Madden creative player, he would be it. He's the perfect pitcher. Jay Johnson, the LSU head coach, said that he's the best college baseball player he's ever seen. This is a guy that's been to the College World Series 2 or 3 times, I believe. And here are his numbers, Wes.
Where did they get this guy, man?
He transferred from Air Force.
What?
Actually, here are his numbers this year, okay? He's 5-0. He has a .81 ERA. Those are really good numbers, okay? He's pitched 44 innings. He's given up just 19 hits, 3 extra base hits, all doubles. So no homers against the South Carolina team that I believe probably still leads the nation in homers, right? If not, they're up there. They have 72 homers. He has struck out in 44 innings, 83 batters, and has walked just 8. He also had a strikeout the other day. I think this is against Tennessee. 3-pitch strikeout, all 3 pitches 100 or above. So and he's 6'6", 247. So there's my scouting report on Paul Skeens. Good luck to everybody. Certified dude. Now, the good news, South Carolina, they have some certified dudes. They're really, really good too.
Pretty good too. Gamecocks are tweaking the rotation again, by the way. I was hoping we'd get this info before the show was over. We do. So no Noah Hall listed this week. He had been dealing with some back trouble. That is one concern, I think.
Yeah, that's not
Anytime you talk about a back, I get nervous. So we'll see what happens there. He's not in the announced rotation. Gamecocks will reinsert Will Sanders into the rotation for Thursday against Thursday-Friday series. Jack Mahoney on Friday, and then TBA on Saturday. Colin Taylor in his story noting that Saturday could be highly dependent on who pitches on Thursday and Friday. You've got several options you could go to. So we'll see what happens there. And hey, maybe Noah Hall feels great by Saturday. I don't know. Right now, TBA. That's one. Carolina's been coming up aces for much of this year. They have had some injuries to a couple of hitters, obviously, but that would be a bad big blow for Carolina. So Gamecock fans obviously going to be hoping the best for Noah Hall. And by the way, if you want to go to that game, final thing I got, Gamecock Central and 107.5, we are giving away, Chris, 2 tickets to Thursday's game. I'm going to throw this link into the chat for those who are watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, you still have time if you listen to this show before Thursday morning. I think 11 a.m. is the cutoff, maybe. Go to that link. It's on GamecockCentral.com. It's on our Twitter as well. It's in the chat. Enter your email address, agree to the terms, and you'll be entered into a drawing. 2 free tickets, South Carolina versus LSU, Thursday. Chris, I've been pushing the heck out of this contest. I'm pumped for this series. I hope it's a sellout, man. I don't know if it is yet. Y'all go sell that thing out.
Yeah, weather's probably got some people scared away, but definitely go win yourself some free tickets. Can I enter that, Wes, or are you denying my entry?
I think there's something in the fine print that says you cannot.
All right. Well, nonetheless, you should go do it. Hey, while we're offering up free stuff, I have another free
You got
thing
more
to
free
offer.
stuff?
I have more. I'm in a giving mood today. Garnet Trust is putting on a WNBA draft watch party that is also free. You do have to pay for your food and beverage, but it is with our friends at Market on Main, Wes. That will be Monday, which is April the 10th from 6:30 to 9:30. The rumor is there will be some current Gamecock players there, and then you can go check out where Aaliyah Boston and her other former teammates get drafted. Spoiler alert, Aaliyah Boston will be number 1, but you can watch her get drafted and see the others. DJ Puff will be there. Like I said, there'll be some current Gamecock players there. Registrations, from what I hear from Jeremy Smith at Garnet Trust, are starting to really come through. So a lot of people jumping in on this. I'm going to drop the link. Wes, you okay with that? Can I drop this registration link also? So 2 free things. Don't say we never did anything for you.
The the big TV will be there too. So if y'all haven't been to Market on Main,
yeah,
biggest jumbotron
ever
in Columbia, yeah, ever
at any restaurant ever. And incredible food and drinks too. So go check that out. It's free. Hang out with your fellow Gamecock fans. Support those players. It'll be a good time.
Yeah, that's Main Street, Columbia. Friends at Market on Main. Great people. Great spot. All right, I think that's it. Check out all the free stuff. For Chris, I'm Wes. Y'all have a good one.